I've never been afraid of the dark. I was afraid of what was visible in the light. For example, rust stains on the nursery wall, which disappeared in the morning as if they had never existed. Or the shadows from the branches outside the window, like fingers scratching the glass. But the real nightmare started when I found an old album under the floor of my closet. I was 7 when we moved into this house. My father called it a lifelong project, a 2-story mansion with peeling paint that we inherited for next to nothing after the death of the previous owners. Mom didn't want to move. She said that the bedroom smelled of sweet rot, but her father laughed. "It's just mice, dear. I'll take out, and that's it." The first strange thing happened a week later. I woke up to the sound of footsteps in the attic. Knock, knock, knock. It was as if someone was walking back and forth, dragging a chain behind them. My father, checking the attic, found only a torn bag of dolls. Their faces were smeared with black tar, and there were buttons with cracked glass instead of eyes. "The toys of the previous owners," he said, throwing the bag into the trash. I threw it away. But 3 days later, the dolls returned. They were lying on my bed, lined up in a row. On the wall above them, the words "Don't throw away my friends" were written in charcoal. Mom called the police for the first time. The precinct officer, a fat man with a worn badge, looked around the house and grinned. Children often come up with stupid things. Check if it is poisoned by carbon monoxide. My father bought a carbon monoxide detector. He wasn't squeaking. But a month later, Mom found a package in the freezer under the bags of vegetables. Inside was a photo of our family, taken on the day of the move. Our faces were crossed out with a red marker, and on the back it says, "I saw you come in. You're not coming out." After that, my father installed the cameras. Nothing. It wasn't until 3:14 a.m. that the screen blinked, showing a black rectangle, as if someone was covering the lens with their palm. When I was 12, I found an album. I was rummaging through the closet, looking for an old game console, when the floorboard caved in under my knee. Inside was a leather folder with a faded inscription, "My guests." The first page is a photo of an elderly woman in a 70s dress. Her mouth was sewn shut with coarse threads, and her eyes were wide with horror. The next one shows a teenager chained to a pipe in the basement. I recognize this pipe. She was in our basement. Marginal notes, number 14, resisted for 5 hours. I had to remove the language. Number 23, error. The body was making too much noise in the wall. I ran to my father, but when he looked at the album, he turned pale. "This is someone's sick joke." Forget. But I haven't forgotten. That night, I woke up to the sound of creaking. The door to my room was slowly opening. My father was standing in the doorway. He holds a kitchen knife in one hand. In the other, there was a bundle with a woman's wig sticking out of it. "Mother's. Dad." I whispered. He didn't answer. His eyes were empty, like those dolls in the attic. He took a step towards me, raising the knife, but then the alarm went off. The motion sensor roared. The father started as if waking up and dropped the knife. What am I doing?" He fell to his knees, clutching his head. Mom ran into the room with a baseball bat. Later at the hospital, doctors said that his father had short-term psychosis. But I saw him looking at the album before that. I'm 30 now. I returned to this house after my father's death. They found him in the garage with his veins cut. In his suicide note, "They won't let me leave." The autopsy revealed that he had an implant under the skin of the back of his head. A tiny chip that wasn't listed in any medical reports. The electronics engineer, I showed it to, whistled. "Military development. They're used for, remote behavior control. Like a doll." I asked. He blushed and left quickly. "Yesterday, I dismantled the wall in the basement. There was a niche behind the drywall. There are 8 pairs of shoes inside. Children's and adult. All right shoes. On the soles, dates, 2003, 1997, 2015. And a voice recording on a cassette. A woman's whisper. If you can't hear that, they're already in the house. Don't trust anyone, even for myself. I'm writing this now, sitting in a locked bathroom. Something is scratching at the door, repeating in his father's voice. Open it. I'll explain everything. But I remember how his shirt smelled that night. The smell of almonds and metal. Like a chip, the scratching sound was replaced by silence. I pressed my ear to the door, trying to catch a rustle, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. Sweat dripped from his forehead onto the tile, leaving a dark stain. It burned in my pocket. I was clutching a chip cut out of my father's body. He was as cold as a nail from the freezer. Jake, the voice outside the door spoke again, but now it was my voice. You don't want to die like Dad, do you? I jerked back, hitting my back against the sink. The mirror above her wavered, and I noticed that its corner was slightly raised. There's a gap under it, filled with dust and an envelope. I used nail scissors to fake the edge of the mirror. It would have fallen with a crash if I hadn't caught it in time. There was a stack of letters behind the panel. All are addressed to the father. Sender, the OWL Project. The first letter. Participant number 214, James Rowe. Your report on subject number 14, son, has been accepted. The implant is stable. Proceed to the group exposure monitoring phase. P.S. Do not forget to clean the ventilation shafts. The last corpse has spoiled the air. I threw up in the sink. The acid burned my throat, but I kept reading. The father was not a victim. He was a supervisor. All my childhood, he implanted chips in my vaccinations. And the album with the victims? His file. Guests are those whom he brought into the house for experiments. Then the bathroom light flickered. I turned around, and there was a doll from my childhood lying on the floor. Her eye button was now glued crookedly, and a key was sticking out of her mouth. It has an engraving on it, attic. Emergency access. The voice outside the door laughed, now in his mother's voice. He taught me how to play hide and seek Jakey. Remember? I climbed out through the ventilation grate, scraping my knees against the metal. An air duct led to the garage. There, under a pile of old tires, I found my mother's diary. Her last entry. James says I'm sick. That they would come if I told them about the room behind the kitchen. But I saw him leading them out through the basement. Children in black jumpsuits. How he feeds them with something from a syringe. I'll try to follow it today. If I don't come back, Jakey, run. Even if you have to burn down the house. Date, the day before she disappeared. Attic. The key fitted the lock on the hatch. The stairs descended with a dusty creak. Upstairs, it smelled of formalin and fried meat. The flashlight picked out a table with surgical instruments from the darkness. Syringes with black liquid. And the cage. There's a man in it. He looked up, and I recognized the police officer who had laughed at our doll story 20 years ago. His eyes were burned out, and a badge with a number 214, be hung around his neck. They swapped you for a copy, he croaked, pointing at the wall. Photo. Father. Mother. Me. We were smiling at the camera, but our pupils were square like robots. Caption. Generation 3.0. Success. You're not real, the precinct officer grinned, pulling a knife out from under his rags. And I'm your past. The door downstairs flew out with a bang. The policeman's knife flashed in the lamplight. I jumped back, hitting the table. The syringes with the black liquid fell to the floor, and the glass crunched under the boots. He lunged at me, but tripped over a chain chained to the wall. The rotten flesh on his ankle tore, like wet paper, exposing the bone. You're a doll. He spat out bloody saliva, pointing the knife in my direction. They implanted your memory. Your mom, your dog, it's all fake. I grabbed a scalpel from the table. My hand was shaking, but I screamed like a wild animal and plunged the blade into his throat. Warm blood splashed on the photos with our family smiles. He wheezed, grabbing my arm. His fingers dug into his wrist, leaving bruises the color of rotten plums. Go to the room behind the kitchen. He hissed, releasing me. There's your... The body went limp. I pulled a bunch of keys out of his pocket. One of them had a tag with the address of our kitchen. The wall behind the refrigerator was fake. The drywall crumbled under the blows of the axe, opening the steel door with a combination lock. The code? I entered the date of my mother's disappearance. Refusal. I tried the date of the move. Refusal. Then, the number from the letter, 214. Click. It smelled of antiseptic and baby powder. Shelves with hundreds of cassettes. Each one has my name and date on it. Jacob, 4 years old. A loyalty test. Jacob, 12 years old. The first murder simulation. I inserted a random tape into the player. The screen turned to snow, and I saw myself in a room with a man nailed to the wall. I was smiling, holding a soldering iron to his eye. Well done, son, his father's voice said off camera. Now clear the area. On the record, I took out a knife and I pulled out the plug, but laughter came from the speakers. Real. From behind. I broke off and rushed to the exit, but the door slammed shut. Gas hissed in the ventilation. The sweet smell of almonds filled my lungs. "Congratulations," his father's voice poured out of the speakers. "You passed the final test." The shadows swam before my eyes. The last thing I saw was my hand disappearing into thin air, like smoke. I woke up on a cold concrete floor. My head ached, and my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth like it had been burned by a blowtorch. The light of a flickering lamp somewhere above hit my eyes. I tried to get up, but I couldn't. The arms and legs are held together with nylon ties. Turning my head, I saw a wall covered with scratches. Letters, numbers, curved lines. Someone was trying to count the days or write down a message. There's a rusty bucket with dried stains in the corner. It's like in a cheap thriller, only the pain is real. The door creaked. A woman in a white coat came in with a medical table. Her face. My God, that's our former neighbor, Mrs. Clark. She always brought me cookies on weekends. "Hi, Jacob," she smiled, taking out a syringe with a cloudy liquid. "Dad would be proud of you. You've lasted the longest." "Where?" The voice broke into a cough. "At home, honey. You're always at home." She wiped my neck with an alcohol wipe. The chill made me twitch. We just changed the scenery. The needle entered the vein. A wave of heat filled my body. The room swam. "Why?" I managed to say, to understand how deeply a lie can be implanted. She adjusted her glasses. "Your father was a genius. He proved that it is possible to create a person from fragments of other people's memories. Did you even know that your mom was the sixth understudy?" I lunged for her, but the braces bit into my skin. "Calm down. You'll forget everything soon. We'll insert a new tape. Why don't we make you a firefighter? Or..." She bent down, smelling of red Moscow perfume like her mother's. "Or will we bring back that happy day when we sang Happy Birthday to you? The murderers." She inserted a second syringe. "Gardeners. We prune the branches so that the tree grows properly." Consciousness began to disintegrate. The last thing I heard was a child's laughter, like my own from the tapes. I woke up in my bed. Sunlight, birdsong. On the bedside table there is a photo of a family. Father, mother, me with a puppy in my arms. Rex. My head was buzzing, but I remembered everything. Implant. Album. My father's knife. I went to the window. Our yard, the apple tree that my father planted, and the fresh grave under it. Without the cross. Without a sign. The shovel was by the barn. I dug until iron clanged against metal. Container. There are passports inside. Mine. 12 pieces. Different names. Different dates of birth. There was an envelope with a film on the bottom. The inscription. Jacob. 8 years old. Memory correction. I put it in an old projector. The screen showed the same room. I am sitting on the bed, and Father is stroking my head. Today we will erase a bad dream. About a woman in a white coat. About steel doors. You'll wake up and be happy. Yes, Dad. The child on the screen smiles. The projector smoked, the film melted. But I was already running to the garage. I found a pistol under the driver's seat of my father's Jeep. Cold, heavy, smelling of grease. They will come in the evening. To prune the branches again. But now I'm ready to become an axe. I locked all the windows, lowered the blinds, and scattered glass balls from old Christmas tree toys on the approaches to the house. They should crunch underfoot. He put the gun on the kitchen table, next to a can of gasoline for the lawnmower. It smelled like when I was a kid, when my father taught me how to burn dry leaves. The first car arrived at sunset. A black van with no license plates. 2 men in blue overalls like plumbers got out of it. But I recognized one of them, Mr. Harrison, our school librarian. He always gave me books about survival in extreme conditions. Jacob. He knocked on the door, smiling like he was at a parent-teacher meeting. Open it, let's talk. I have a letter for you from your father. I pressed myself against the wall, my finger on the trigger. His heart was pounding so hard that it seemed they could hear him through the door. I saw your letters on the wall. I shouted. Go away, or you'll suffocate on gasoline. Mrs. Clark got out of the van, adjusting her medical bag. Honey, you don't want to repeat your mother's fate, do you? Her voice sounded like honey syrup. She was also trying to heat gasoline. Sweat trickled down his back. I remembered how my mom accidentally dropped a lighter in the garage. Explosion. Firefighters said she died instantly. Lie. Last chance. Mrs. Clark took out her phone and turned on the recording. Baby crying. My crying from the tape. Do you want to hear how you called your mother when we erased your memory at the age of 7? I pulled the cord tied to the propane tank on the porch. A deafening bang, and the wall of windows exploded into fragments. They fell to the ground, covering their faces. I ran out the back door, grabbing my gun, but the van was already blocking the exit. Mr. Harrison grabbed me from behind, wrapping his elbow around my neck. It smelled of peppermint gum and gunpowder. "Calm down, kid. It's all over now," he whispered. I bit his hand until it bled, broke free, and ran towards the forest. Bullets whistled overhead, cutting down branches. My feet sank into the mud, but I didn't stop. It was burning in my pocket. I was clutching a USB flash drive with data stolen from a steel box. If I get out, it will destroy their project. I hid the boat in my father's old hunting lodge. The river led to the highway. I'll get to the city. I'll find the journalists. But when I ran to the shore, the boat was riddled with bullets. Rex was sitting in the stern, my dog, who was killed by his father. He was wagging his tail, and a chip was sticking out from under the fur on his neck. I fell to my knees, scratching the ground with my nails. The bolts clicked shut behind him. The bullets entered my back before I heard the shots. Hot needles pierced his ribs, and his lung filled with blood. I fell face first into the mud, feeling the flash drive slip out of my fingers. Rex whined, nuzzling my cheek. "Well done," said a voice. The boot pressed down on my arm, kneading the bones. Mrs. Clark picked up the flash drive, wiped it with the hem of her robe, and put it in her pocket. I almost ruined decades of work. They turned me over on my back. Mr. Harrison was filming on his phone, grinning. Mrs. Clark took out a syringe filled with black liquid. "Don't worry," she inserted the needle into his neck. "You will wake up in a new body. Why don't we make you a policeman? Or a teacher? You'll make girls fall in love with you and collect data." It was getting dark. The last thing I saw was Rex chewing on my severed finger. His chip was flashing red. I woke up in a white room. On the table is a passport in the name of Lucas Grant. Photo of a stranger. I saw his face in the mirror opposite. "Good morning," Mrs. Clark's voice sounded from the speaker. "Today you will start a new life. Your wife is already waiting in your house. Don't disappoint her." There was a knock on the door. A woman with my eyes came in. "Darling, breakfast is ready." She kissed me on the forehead. I went to the window. Our yard, an apple tree, and a fresh grave without a name.